Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 87. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has liked, shared, commented to the show. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guests today. I also want to thank our sponsors. Family owned and operated since 1976, Sampson Equipment has been specializing in full turnkey weight room buildouts from planning to installation. Based in Las Cruces, New Mexico, Sampson provides professional weight room solutions for those looking to lead the way in advancing our strength and conditioning profession. Coaches have relied on Sampson as their top resource for all their weight room renovations because they provide the finest materials and design, product customization, and the most reputable customer service in the business. If you're in the market for elite level strength equipment, weight room renovations, or upgrades, be sure to check out SampsonEquipment.com to see how Sampson has been delivering clients a long-lasting yet affordable product for over 4 decades. Also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength. If you're in the market for the highest quality strength and conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out CerberusStrength.com and use promo code STRENGTH_game to save on your next order. And in this week's episode, I am joined by Bryan Woolson. Bryan is the regional director of the MedStar Health Sports Performance program in Forest Hill, Maryland, where he oversees the day-to-day operations of the Harford County facility. In addition, Woolson is the head strength and conditioning coach for the Johns Hopkins women's lacrosse team. Woolson has been working with the Hopkins lacrosse program for over 10 years now, first starting with the women's team in 2013. In his time at Hopkins, he has also spent time working with the field hockey, men's soccer, and women's basketball programs. From 2011 to 2015, he served as a strength conditioning coach for Boys Latin School of Maryland lacrosse team and has been a performance coach for the NEMS Lacrosse Club since 2013. Woolson is the owner of M.O.A.B Performance, an online program that provides training and nutrition advice to help clients and athletes alike achieve their goals through a life of pain-free performance. Woolson is a former college football running back at Salisbury University, a 3-year starter and team captain in the senior season, and still holds multiple lifting records for his position. After a brief stint competing in powerlifting, he still continues to strength train and also an avid golfer. I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Bryan Woolson. What's going on, everybody? Today, I am joined by Coach Bryan Woolson, a former Salisbury alumni with me. What's going on today, man?
Not much, man. Feels good. Happy to be here.
Hey, I'm excited to have you on. I know we talked a little bit before. We crossed paths a little bit when I was at Salisbury. You had in their terms, you had a prolific career, and like I said, you were my mentors, Andy Deck, Mike Kudleski, those guys that were GAs. They put me on the radar. You were the guy to watch, and I know you had some lifting records and everything there. So
Yep.
it's cool to see your coaching career. And I know we're going to get into that stuff pretty soon here.
Yeah, it was fun to have those records up there, and I still have a couple of athletes that go to Salisbury, and they like to take a picture of my records that I still hold. So it's pretty cool that, 11 years removed from college, and I still hold a record or two
Hey, well,
with the football team.
I'm glad those are still up there and keep the tradition alive. Like I said,
Yep,
there's some pretty strong running backs that come out of there,
there are.
and you're definitely on that list. But hey, really want to get into it. How you kind of started in the strength game? Like, I know you played football growing up, but what else did you kind of play? What I know you dabbled in powerlifting, but what's your kind of current training look like as well?
Yeah, so ever since I was younger, I knew I always wanted to be in the medical field. So growing up, I always knew like that's the direction I wanted to go to. My mom's always been in the healthcare system, so I just kind of grew up around that atmosphere. And in high school, loved working out. Like from the age of 10, my brother got his first universal weightlifting machine that my parents got him when he was 14 and I was 10. And I used to just sneak up there when they didn't know it and just slowly move the weights so they couldn't hear me. And my love for lifting weights kind of started from that point. But in high school, I suffered like a pretty bad hamstring tear and went through the rehab process. And I just kind of knew at that point, I wanted to help those try to prevent that injury from occurring. And then took that and went to Salisbury where I wanted to be an ATC because I loved that too, helped rehab me back with an athletic trainer. And so at Salisbury, you had to either kind of pick or choose. You either went the ATC route exclusively or you played your sport. So went along with and just played football instead of doing the ATC route, but stayed very connected with the strength and conditioning, kept growing my passion with that, obviously through learning from Matt Nine. And then at that time for me, Mike Zordos was our GA then, and who's, as we all know, is like the king of undulating periodization. So I learned a lot from him, and that just continued to add to my passion with strength and conditioning.
I
And
didn't.
from
Yeah,
yeah,
go on. Yeah, go on. I completely forgot Mike Zordos was there at that
yeah,
time. So that's
dude, and he's total animal. I mean, he used to be up at 3 a.m. in the weight room before we would get in there, already doing his lifts. He used to have a website called like madmike.com, and he would just post all of his freak lifts. I mean, that guy was, he was an animal and obviously just very brilliant in this profession. So he now has a journal called Mass, and they always are putting out great articles on research. So anybody who's listening to this, I would definitely check Mike Zordos out. He's a huge reference for me.
no, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That time period was crazy for some of the GAs. Like
it was.
at that time, you're talking about Mike Zordos, you're talking about like Mike Hidleski, like competed
Hmm.
for Team USA for I think 11. I think he was Team USA invite 11 times. Andy Deck was a
Yeah.
pro strongman. Like, and
Hmm.
then it dropped off when it got to me and everybody else.
Yeah. So like, it was crazy because like Hedleski was still on the football team my freshman year. And then after my freshman year, he stopped and went like heavy into the S&C full time. Um, and learned from him while I was there. He was always doing awesome things with us. And then Andy popped in my senior year, and I wish I would have had more time with Andy because Andy's very good at everything that he does. And I kept in touch with some of the younger guys, and they absolutely loved having him there as their strength coach. So
No, that's awesome. And that's kind of funny too, because when I got to Salisbury, originally like ATC was my route. Like that's what I
mm,
was thinking about doing as well. And then I sat down and talked to like the advisor there,
mm-hmm.
and they told me it was going to take me like 5 years to graduate. And I was like, hell no. And then
Yeah,
I realized
that's
I did
crazy.
not want to do that side.
Yeah, they didn't even give me the option. They just sat me down and said, "You can't do both." I'm like, "You're not even gonna at least allow me to at least allow me to try. And if I fail, it's on me. It's not on you as an institution." But so I just went with physical education, teacher education, with a minor in exercise science. Um, and then as I got into my internships with PE, I'm like, "There's just no way I can do this profession at all." So then I started getting back from where I'm homegrown from Harford County in Maryland. Started getting internships with local private gyms my junior year of college, and then got lucky enough to hook up with Jay Dyer, who's the director of sports performance at MedStar and the head strength coach for the Johns Hopkins men's lacrosse team. And he luckily gave me a summer internship. And then I had all interest of coming back to Salisbury for my grad assistantship with Matt Nine, but I had to take a year off since I missed the time loop for it all. And Jay gave me a 1 year internship under him, which I was thankful for. So I did that, started applying for Salisbury, and then Jay offered me a full time position. And so I took that, and I've been with MedStar ever since. So,
Yeah, if an internship manifests into a full-time job, I'd say turn down a GA.
Yeah,
Sorry, you
it's
can go
definitely
back.
different.
You can go back and do your master's degree somewhere else, or you can do it online
Hmm.
at this point. But I
Yeah,
think uh I think it all ended up working out in the long run with it, like going
yeah,
from PE, getting into like sports performance side, and then kind of skipping the GA to get the full-time job because you've been there since what, almost 10 years now, right?
yeah. I mean, I started with Jay full time. Technically, the summer of 2012, did my full time internship starting 2011 summer. So yeah, it's been quite the ride.
No, that's awesome. I know in that time too, you've worked with a lot of other lacrosse programs. I mean, you work with
Hmm.
like at the high school level. I know NEMS is like one of
That's
the
a club
lacrosse
team.
clubs. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then working with the Hopkins women's program for a long time. How's
yes.
that kind of been? Because did you play lacrosse growing up or is that
Played it,
just
played it. Yeah, so I played middle school through high school for lacrosse. Yeah.
okay, awesome. Yeah, because it's interesting to have such kind of a prolific mentor and then also be able to work with that mentor as long as you
Hmm.
have. How has that relationship grown? Because Jay Dyer is pretty well known in the lacrosse community. But for you, it's interesting because some people might pop in and do an internship with him and then stay
Hmm.
connected. Like that's the same thing I've done with Matt Nine or
Yep.
any of my other mentors where you pop in, you work with them for a little bit, but you kind of go do your own thing. For you, it's unique because the person that you've mentored with the most, you still work for in a capacity.
Hmm.
How has that kind of grown? Do you still consider him a mentor or are you kind of like colleagues now?
I mean, we're definitely colleagues. We both bounce ideas off of each other. But like the cool thing with Jay is that he gave me, authenticity pretty early on. So I hopped on board with him. Like again, like timing is everything, and his MedStar was starting to really expand with their strength and conditioning. And so 2 years into being with him, we got a phone call from a private guy that wanted to start a business in Harford County, and they wanted us to do the strength and conditioning work for them. And so Jay and I take a drive out here. We look at the space; it looks great. And then he turns to me and he's like, "Hey, this is all on you. If it succeeds, it's all on you. If it fails, it's all on you." He's like, "So best of luck." And he just kind of like threw me into the fire, all on my own with that. Um, which I'm grateful for because you gotta like just run with it right away, learn with it. So the business out here in Harford County, I started off, I can still remember my very first winter. I had 3 clients. And into that summer, I had already lost them. I'm like, man, this is like, what am I doing wrong? And I got 3 new ones, and those 3 guys have stuck with me all the way through their entire college career. So they've been with me for 9 years now because they all did their 5th years. Um, and it's just been amazing to see go from, 3 clients to an active of 80 plus clients in that time span. We've moved locations as well. We have a full time space now that we occupy by ourselves. That's about 3,500 square feet. We have a part time PT in here now, which is great. So it's super easy and convenient for us. If heaven forbid anything happens to one of our kids, she can just come over, take a look at them, let us know what we need to do. Plus, we get to see our athletes, go from the PT realm and then transition into the strength and conditioning realm and get back to that sports reconditioning phase. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's
that's
been crazy.
that's I've seen that happen a lot too, like the PT, the in-house PTs working
Hmm.
with a lot of sports performance. It seems like it's going towards a new norm. So
Yeah, it's and plus it from like a referral base, it just makes it so much more smooth. You have your doctor who's referring to the PT post surgery, and then if they're already in your space, the athlete's already starting to build a relationship with you. You're already starting to get a little bit of trust, which we all know is huge in our profession. When you get a new athlete, like you want to create that trust and respect between one another. So when they're already in here with the PTs, you start to have little conversations every time that they come in. So then when they transition from PT to you, that's a much easier transition. They have a little bit of trust. They know you already. They see you interacting with all the other athletes. So they kind of understand your philosophy, how you coach, and they kind of understand the expectations once they go there.
no, it's really cool, and it's cool to see how the department and like what you guys created has kind of grown to your own
Hmm.
space, and
Yep.
what it's evolved into nowadays is pretty cool. So have you seen any, obviously like you're kind of from where, like your hometown essentially,
Hmm.
like where you grew up. So have you seen any benefit specifically like being in that one spot in that area for a long time? And then because I know for some people in the coaching realm, private sector, you stay a little bit like centrally located, like where you're from or where
Hmm.
you want to be. But in the college sector, you're always moving around. So like
Yeah.
selfishly, I always want to figure out and pick guys' brains about, hey, if I ever want to open a place or open a facility, like what are the drawbacks you see to being in a place for a long time, and like what are the benefits you see like being centrally located for a long time as well.
Yeah. Obviously, like you really have to pick the area in which you want to be in. And everything comes down to like social economics too, right? Like you got to pick an area that people have an expendable income to be able to afford your services. But from being in one space for such a long period of time, I don't really think that there's ever a true drawback to it. When people come to my door, they're like, "We've heard of you for such a long time. You have, a great reputation. This is why we're bringing our kids here because we trust what you've done in the past." When I was first starting out, it was like the complete opposite. It was, we don't really know who you are. You don't have any reputation around here, so we're going to go to other people that have been here for a longer period of time. So like you really do need to have that basis and that reputation and that experience in that area for people to really start to draw towards you and you being the number one name that pops up in that area.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because even if you could be the most prolific coach,
Mm-hmm.
and I think social media has done a very interesting job of this, especially like anybody that has their own like small business, like or online platform or anything, you could be doing really well,
Mm-hmm.
like when you think about that as a platform, but your platform is global. So
Yep.
your biggest clientele could be coming from India. And then
Yeah. Right.
you're like, oh well, I have 1,000 people that buy stuff from me every month. But then you sit down and try to open a brick and mortar and you try to get clients in the door and you're like, why
Mm-hmm.
aren't people coming in? And it was like, well, your demographic isn't from this area. You could be a 20-year veteran coach,
Exactly.
but like no one around you that's actually going to drive to the place and trust you to be their coach really cares about that stuff until like
Mm-hmm.
word of mouth around the area starts to pick up and like you have a
Yeah.
buzz in the community.
Correct. Correct. That's very true.
So like learning all this stuff, like you talk about all the business side, and like it throws my head for a loop, just because like in the college sector, you really don't
Mm-hmm.
deal with many of those things except for
Yeah.
maybe fundraising or
Yep.
trying to put together like maybe speaking events or conferences, like, but it's all associated with your school. So
Mm-hmm.
like, did you already have an idea of some of this stuff, or is it kind of trial by fire and just kind of watching Jay go through the process and then MedStar
Yeah.
building up and then you just being involved and learning on the go?
Yeah. It's honestly just been like a trial by fire. Obviously, I had Jay there to kind of help me out, and he knew a couple tactics that helped him early on when he was branching out and doing his own branding back in the day. And so, but at the same time, I've been really lucky. A former classmate of ours, Patrick Reeves, who's the owner of PR Strength, he, right as I was um, opening up the Harford County spot, he was at Sarge Athletics and was already beginning to have talks about opening his own spot up as well. So being able to draw from him from questioning for questions too, like we have been able to grow together and like branch out and grow our businesses at the same time. So like having him go through the process at the same time has actually really been beneficial for me to see him and talk to him about like the do's and don'ts that have worked for him and the same likewise for me. So
Yeah, that's great. Picking the brain of people that have done it before
mm-hmm.
and having a quality mentor seems to be invaluable. And
Yeah.
it's good to have those resources around, especially when maybe your whole life investment or everything that you're gonna do
Yeah.
is kind of on the table when
Yep.
you sign that lease.
Exactly. That is so true. Yes.
Hey, so you talked about it too with some of your athletes being with you for a long amount of time.
Hmm.
How has that kind of worked? Because for you, you balance between the private sector and working with
Hmm.
probably, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like a wide range of different, like from athletes to clients to
Yep.
maybe middle school all the way up to college realm too.
Hmm.
How do you kind of tailor how you coach like the different training ages and the different, especially the different goals for these different athletes that come in the door? Because it's way different when you go to college and you're like, hey, Johns Hopkins women's lacrosse, like the expectation is to compete for a championship,
Hmm.
whether at the conference level or the national level, versus someone that comes in the door is like, I want to make sure I make JV this year and then next year make varsity and then hopefully play in college. Like that you have to be able to coach them a little bit differently, right?
Yeah, you have to have a little bit of a different voice with them than versus when I have, my training voice with Hopkins. But the overall like philosophy is for me is always going to be the same, which is whenever we step inside of our training facility, like our goal is to get better that day in some way, shape, or form. So from the like our middle school athletes when they come in the door, our goal is let's better our foundation to the best of our ability. So let's make our movements as precise as we can. Let's understand how to break down properly. Let's really focus on our first step. Let's begin to truly understand like how our body naturally reacts to a stimulus and how our form looks during that place and time. And from the middle school to then to high school, they have the confidence of what we built them in the middle school to now take into high school. And now it's like, hey, now we are in college prep, right? Like the vast majority of you are in our program because you have aspirations of playing in college. So we're going to take it in that such a way. So we hold them accountable. Um, when they're not in season, the kids are coming to us 3 to 5 days a week. So there's a time commitment that they have to be able to block out. And there is no like you pick and choose when you come. Like this is scheduled out, right? Like you're making a commitment to be here at this time for X amount of time, and you need to be present while you're here. And we just hold them to that expectation the entire time. And then obviously, like our private sector kids, when they come home from college, this is something that I wish all private sector strength coaches would do is like when they come home with to me, whether it's in the wintertime for preseason or summertime and it's postseason, they hand us the packet. We look at it. We look at how we already have our summer programming formatted and we blend the two seamlessly together so that they're still kind of following like what we want to do. And we're still adhering to their strength coach who quite honestly sees them way more than we do when they're away at college. So,
Yeah, that's great. Because I've always been the proponent, and athletes have asked me, they've felt like kind of torn between, well, I work with this guy and I've worked with him through high school, and it's got me to this point, but you're my college coach, and like they're kind of obligated, like they don't get to
mm-hmm,
choose me, but at the same time, like this is what is the direct correlation between practice in the morning to lifting in the afternoon and like to the
mm-hmm,
field. So, but I tell them every time they go home, I was like, give my phone number out to your like private coach if you want to. Like I'm willing to talk to them. And honestly, as long as they have an idea and like the expectation does not change for you when you come back to campus, like these are the standards you still have to meet. This is what
mm-hmm.
you're going to be able to do. As long as you don't veer too far away from that and you're able to do it, I'd rather give full freedom to anybody in the private sector or anybody you're working with. Like as long as they're not doing any harm, like any quality coach should do,
Yeah,
because they see you in person. They can make those changes directly and you're going to have them for an extended amount of time. Now, if you go see them for
exactly. Yeah.
one weekend, like fuck that.
Yeah,
But if you're
exactly.
going there for the whole summer,
Mm,
like use that opportunity and like maybe bring me something back too. Like
yeah,
if you really liked something they do, something new, or like they have a new piece of equipment, or you have questions, like by all means, like that's great. But I think I can only count on maybe one hand how many like other like private sector coaches have reached out to me like
hey,
directly for it. And those
the exact
conversations have been
same.
awesome, but
Hmm.
like I can't do the inverse of that. I can't call every single person they're doing
Correct.
this, and I'm not going to call like a Globo gym because
Yeah.
if they're going to train by themselves, but like
Yeah.
that invitation is always open. It's just it's crazy that I don't know if enough people on
Mm-mm.
either side, college or private side, really think that way.
Yeah. I mean, I do the exact same thing. So all of my girls know, like when they go home, you hand our packet. Well, it's not even really a packet anymore. We have to use Team Builder, but so like they show their Team Builder, app lift to their strength coach. And it's always like, please have them reach out to me if they have any questions whatsoever about like exercise modifications, whatever it may be. And same exact thing. I can only count in one hand how many coaches have actually reached out and called me, on their summer or winter packets. I have probably have called more private strength coaches than I have had call me, which is, it's kind of crazy. I don't know what it is. Like in our community, like I would imagine that we all have one universal goal, which is the betterment of the kids that we're working with. It's not about like bettering our reputation. It's just about like when we get these kids in front of us, it's about how are we helping them grow and achieve the goals that they want. So we should all be working in unison together to accomplish that. But it doesn't always seem to work that way.
No, unfortunately, that doesn't seem like that's the case. So how I wanted to ask this too. How's the transition been? Because I know like in your time you've had a pretty stable staff at Hopkins. I know there's been some changes within the program for your women's team. How do those changes kind of affect you? And then like what were those conversations like? Because correct me if I'm wrong, you had the same coaching staff since you started?
Yeah. So I had the original coach, assistant coach, and then the assistant head coach, and then our assistant coach for our offense has been the only one that kind of like changed in and out a couple times. But yeah, so I had 9 years straight with the same two coaches. So going into it, obviously I was fitting their mold, trying to adapt to my philosophy of coaching to meet with their coaching philosophy. But as time went on, I got a little bit more autonomy for them. I could kind of like push back towards my philosophy a little bit. And the new coaching staff that just came in, honestly, the head coach is the same age as me. He's got the same exact ideals, and his staff is on the same page. Like they're very fitness driven, and the practice format is fitness driven. So we use a program called Fit for 90, made by John Cohn. And so, which is great because you're looking at RPE scales. Everything has a very specific rating for that day. We have a volume load for that day. We have a work to rest ratio in all of our drills that we do. So it's great to see a coaching staff come in with a strength coach mind set format and implement that to practice, because that makes it so much easier for me to take what we do in the weight room and sometimes on the field and just combine that to their practice format.
No, that's awesome. That seems a little bit more seamless. Obviously, like
Mm-hmm.
building the trust and that relationship with them is always going to take the most amount of time, but if they come in and they have like goals in mind, especially not just lacrosse specific goals, but ones that are performance driven and
Mm-hmm.
you know kind of what the end goal is, it's easy for you to work backwards. But
Yes.
if you have a different goal in mind than the coaching staff, like the coaching staff's always going to win and they're always
Yep.
going to complain if like they want to have the strongest team in the country, but you want to have the fastest team in the country, like you're going to get fired if you're training them that way and they're not going to like
Yep.
that. But
Correct.
if they can easily, especially like speak your language a little bit more and say, hey, this is how we're going to run practice, like
Mm-hmm.
they need to be prepared to do this and this is how we want to perform in games, like you can re-engineer that and work backwards and say, all right, well, this is how I'm going to train them to make sure that they can perform at the optimal level, and then they can do the skill stuff.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. It's worked out seamlessly with the new staff. And I think it's honestly because like our new head coach worked directly with John Cohn when he was at Northwestern, and he understood the premise behind it. And he was almost like he was an assistant coach for Northwestern, but John kind of took him under his wing from like the S&C standpoint and doing all of the data analytics that they were getting from the game tracker and looking at the kids. And he like grew to understand and learn how important strength and conditioning is and why you should format practices in the same sense, right? Like we should be having a work to rest ratio when we're practicing. It shouldn't just be like all go nonstop, boom, boom, boom. And then I truly believe it has helped us limit a lot of our overuse injuries this past season.
Yeah, and overuse injuries seem to be like the crux for most athletes.
And every age group now, the fact that we're starting to see ACLs at a middle school aged athlete it's not acceptable, and that means we're overcooking them or overtraining them. You shouldn't see an ACL in a seventh grader or a sixth grader. You just shouldn't be seeing that.
Yeah, that's kind of wild, and I'm sure you're even more tapped into that since
Mm-hmm.
you work with that population, and then with MedStar Health and like having a PT essentially in house, like on
Yeah.
call, like you probably see that even more often. Hopefully, it's not so much with your athletes, but I know you're probably tailoring your programs a little bit more. So, like with that in mind, you have athletes that come in like may never play like at the college level or beyond high school. And again, like you said, when you first started, you had some athletes come in for a few months and then like you never saw again. And that's
Mm-hmm.
just like the business side of working in the private sector. So when you kind of create like a long-term program and you have athletes come in not knowing if they're going to be with you for 9 years or 9 weeks, like do you alter the program or do you kind of put them in like, hey, here's block zero, we're going to start you here and like assess you, and then
Mm-hmm.
like if you progress to 9 years down the line and we're working for college, maybe professional, that's different. But if you
Yeah.
get like a high school kid, do you still start them at the same point, or you try to put them in track with the rest of the
So
clients?
So every athlete, every client really comes in, will always do an initial evaluation where we look at everything, right? And then based off of that, and then based off of their current training experience, we'll develop their first block of training from there. And then we'll expand them. So like obviously like depending on what they are coming into us and what their goals are, we always take that in consideration. And then we're looking to see like what we're planning for. So if they're planning for they're just now coming off of a lacrosse season and they have a club lacrosse season coming up for the summertime. But at the same time, come August 15th, they have soccer season that's going to start. We have to, and this could be a brand new kid, and this happens every summer. We'll do an initial evaluation, which will be less strenuous than if they weren't coming off of a season. We'll take it where they are. We'll already have a like 1 to 2 week recovery block put in for them from their previous lacrosse season. Then we'll start to add in a little bit of strength and power work during the club season. We'll then have to go again one more like recovery block post club season because I'm sure you understand like how crazy club lacrosse season is. And then we get maybe 3, possibly 4 weeks, depending on how long their club coach decides to take their last tournament to really get them going for that soccer season. And then at that point, we kind of, again, we'll look at where the weaknesses are and we'll program that last block specifically to help target that.
Yeah, that's I
Yeah.
mean, it's super intensive and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of info to kind of put together, but it's the right approach if you're going to try to do the best for that athlete. And like you said,
Exactly.
make sure that like what your program does is in
Mm-hmm.
line with the goals that they have. And not only just that, but also have an understanding of what their schedule looks like, because it's one thing to just spit out a program that's like, hey, this will get you to your goals. But if you have no idea what they do when they're outside of your facility, and even
Yeah.
though you set parameters that, hey, these are expectations, we expect you to be here 3 to 5 times a week, but you still can't account for if that's 5 hours,
Mm-hmm.
like you still have a whole week of hours that
Yeah.
they're not with you and they're practicing and
Correct.
they're probably playing high school and club. And yeah, club lax on top of once it gets to recruiting season, you're done
Oh,
for. You're done for.
you know, yeah. And we just had a whole handful of girls just go through that last summer. And now we are like starting to prep our next whole handful that are about to go through their junior year of club and doing all of the recruiting camps. And that is probably one of the most stressful times because they'll still find it like necessary to have to go to their club practices, even though they just did 5 straight days of nothing but play games. They went from a showcase on like a Wednesday, Thursday, maybe a partial Friday, to then to the weekend where they probably played a game, 2 games on a Saturday, and maybe have played 2 to 3 on Sunday, right? And then they come to you like on Monday, and you're like, "Yo, we just need to try to make you feel better today. Maybe depending on what you have lined up the rest of this next week, we can kind of get you up a little bit on Tuesday." And then they'll be like, "Well, I'm going to practice on Tuesday," and you're like, honestly, picking up a stick and running up and down the field is kind of the last thing that you need to do right now. But they won't not go, and you don't really have the support from the club coaches, unfortunately, to tell these girls like, yo, like we do need to kind of like pump the brakes, right? Like, let's take it easy. We're not going to do anything strenuous today. Like today's practice should be more of like a skeleton practice. Let's just go through the motions, make sure we all understand everything, and then we'll get you back out the door. But they'll go through, they'll still condition them, they'll run them hard for practice. There'll be a lot of contact, and then that's when you start to see their bodies break down, and then you start to see whether it's a meniscus, it's an MCL, it's an ACL, something's usually going to happen, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the back end of everything, like you're probably the last person that gets a say in the matter.
Mm-hmm.
And club coaches are trying to push out as many athletes and get them scholarships or get them on to the next level or get eyes on them as much as possible, which is unfortunate. I mean, that's a whole tangent that we could go on.
It's like obviously like we get it. Like, yes, you need exposure, right? We need coaches to be able to see you in action and do stuff. But then as a coach, we should be understanding like if they have a showcase in the middle of the week and then you're still going to have them go to this tournament, then practice should be kind of taking a drawback, and you should only be having the girls go out to the field if they just need to work on something for a little bit of confidence before going into that showcase. Or maybe they performed poorly in their showcase and they just want to come with you and just work for a couple of minutes so they feel better before the weekend tournament. But we shouldn't be going a 2-hour hard practice, before and after a showcase before the next tournament. Like that's just not necessary.
Right. Have you ever run into the issue, especially obviously like parents are the ones that are paying and they're coming in to like bring their athletes in, but if their schedule is this stringent and they're playing like all these tournaments, and especially on the women's side too, like the men don't really play tournaments in the same fashion that the women do. The women at Division I level still play stupid like 2 or 3 a days, like in the fall for whatever reason. It's the dumbest thing ever.
It is. Yes. And fall ball really messes with us because fall ball turns into an actual like regular season. So they come into the fall, you might get, depending on when your coach starts, you might get 3 weeks, maybe 4 if you're lucky, to work with the girls just by yourself. And they might have like sprinkles of like little technical practices kind of thrown in there. But then mid to late September, it's fall ball. And now you have 6 weeks of an actual season happening during the fall. They're doing 2 to 3 hour practices. And like you said, they're playing 2 to 3 games on the weekend. And I could care less if they're a running clock game. Like your body doesn't know any different that it's a running clock game. Like you're still out there, high stress environment, running your ass off, still trying to do your absolute best to compete, to show for your coaches that you deserve your starting position or you're trying to gain a starting position. And from us on a programming standpoint, like we can't progress them during that 6-week block the way like we would traditionally want to. So we have to now regress and kind of go into an in-season maintenance phase, which is kind of like we didn't really make that much of a progress in that first 3 to 4 weeks that we had them by ourselves. Now we got to go 6 weeks and really tone everything down. And then we got to spend another a week or two to help you recover from that 6 weeks. And then before we know it, it's Thanksgiving break and you're away again, and it's like that whole fall format needs to change for the betterment of women's lacrosse specifically.
Oh, definitely. I know I've also ruffled a few feathers when I've told coaches or I've told athletes that I do not care if I don't care if you lose 0 to 40 in every single like fall ball game. as long as we come out on the other end like not hurt and we can just blast through training. I would much rather
Yeah,
do that. Those games don't count.
they don't count. They don't. I mean, they only count psychologically for you to feel better about your current positioning on the team. Um, obviously, like they're there for the coaches to make adjustments and to see like who they're going to plug in where. But look, it's the quantity of the games that's just not needed, right?
Right.
Like play like just have like 2 games for the fall. If it's going to still be that same 6 week block, give yourself 2 weeks of just practice. Week 3, you have a game. Let's go another 2 weeks of just practice. And then week 6, let's have your second game. And let's just look at the progress from game 1 to game 2. That's all you need to do. We don't need to have, I counted up one fall. Like we had 11 competitions one fall in that 6 week time frame. 11. That's not needed. So that that really is like an issue within women's lacrosse. It's not doing the girls any good, and it's only creating the issue of more ACLs, MCLs, and everything else in between.
Right. Or script your games a little bit. Like, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
only play these players. Give them time caps.
Yeah,
Something that kind of, I don't know how you're going to break out of the tradition unless they make a ruling on it, but
yeah. I
something's
mean,
got to change.
I like the script sense, so especially since women's lacrosse is now 4 quarters instead of 2 halves. Maybe first quarter is it's your starters. That's your ones. Second quarter is your twos, your threes, and then your fours. So everybody's only getting 15 minutes of play. Um, that would be better, especially if you're going to do multiple games in a day.
Definitely. Have you ever run into this problem? Because I know it's different, like private sector versus college, where athletes are already given to you. Like you kind of have to fulfill like what the client wants, like the paying customer wants. So if you're dealing with lacrosse athletes or anybody that's playing all these tournaments at the high school level, and your best judgment and you want to do no harm is, hey, Monday you're practicing, Tuesday you just came off a 3 game tournament on the weekend, like we got to chill, we got to do some active recovery, like we got to flush some stuff out on Monday. But that's a paying session for a client. Like, have you ever run into any issues where parents are like, hey, I pay you to burn them out, I pay you to like get them better? Like,
Yeah,
is that conversations you end up having, or is that like up on the front end that you kind of like try to tackle it and push it away?
yeah. You try to really do your best on the front end to let them understand, like, hey, there's going to be days that your kid's not going to leave here sweaty and exhausted because that's just not in their best interest. And so the education portion of that is extremely important, not only for the athlete, like your client that's coming into you, but the one who's also paying the money, which is normally the parent or the guardian of that kid, and getting them to understand like this is our philosophy. You're coming to us for our expertise in this area, so trust us with the guidance. And if we say like today's going to be a lighter day, today's going to be a lighter day, right? And if we go from we're supposed to have an hour session and today's only 25 or 30 minutes, like clearly I'm not going to bill you for an hour session. Like we'll prorate it to that 30-minute time point. Now again, like I like all that be well known. And then 2, I don't run into it like a significant amount because the majority of our athletes train in groups, so of 8 to 12. So from like a price factor, obviously it's significantly less than like us having a client that's doing a 101, which obviously your price point's way more at that point. Um, so I think because they're not hit so hard from like a financial group standpoint, I don't get too many of those directly from the parent. But every once in a while, you always have a parent that comes in and picks up like, oh, they're not looking too sweaty today. They're like, yep, that wasn't our goal. They're feeling good. We'll see you next time. You just boom, 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 send them back out. So I try not to entertain this type of comments too much. So
There you go. Yeah, they're most of the ones that are throwing out those opinions are the ones that didn't really play at a very high level or have
mm-hmm.
very little knowledge of what you're actually trying to do and what your goals are.
Correct. Yep.
Hey, so we talked about in the beginning, like obviously like play college football. I know you
Mm-hmm.
dabbled in a little bit of powerlifting and you do a lot of golfing right now too as well.
Yeah.
What
Yeah. That's kind of like my dad hobby.
yeah, how's your training kind of evolved and what do you kind of how's it kind of currently look? Because I know you've been posting a lot of videos for M.O.A.B and your online
Mhm.
fitness platform and everything. So how's that kind of look, and how does that kind of affect what your coaching looks like as well?
So from like a so like what I personally choose to do doesn't necessarily affect my coaching too much. Like I try to keep the two separate because I don't ever want to be like the kind of coach that's like, oh, I'm doing this now. Now I want my athletes to do it this way too. I try to keep what my personal goals are separate from what the athlete goals are. But from my training experience, during my 20s, all I really cared about was getting as strong and as big as possible. Like that was the end all be all to everything, right? And then I had no aspirations of ever competing in powerlifting. I really didn't. It was Patrick Reeves who talked me into it. Like he signed up for one in like it was like a late October. He's hit me up in like mid-November. He's like, "Hey, dude, I just signed up for this. You gotta do it with me." And I'm like, dude, I got no want to want to stand up on a stage, have everybody looking at me as I try to lift this weight. But I caved in and I did it. And the nuts to me, I end up winning my weight division that I was in, which is kind of crazy. I temporarily set the Maryland bench record at that point. It was like 397 and a half pounds. And then that actually like sparked. I was like, oh, this was actually kind of fun. Like everyone there was like cheering you on. Nobody was cheering against you. It's a very cool community to be a part of. Like when you dive into that. And so I started seeked out the help of one of my buddies who was a strength coach at the time at Montana State. And I said, hey, I'm doing this powerlifting competition. I want to get for nationals. Can you train me over the next year for it? And he's like, yeah, sure. And at that point, I had a little bit more time in my schedule, so I could do like a whole training session at one time. So the first 6 months like are going great, right? Like no issues whatsoever. And then I'm starting to get busier and busier and busier, which is good. That's kind of that was the end all be all goal for the private sector business is to grow. So I ended up started doing a 45-minute session very early in the morning. So between like 4:30 and 5 a.m., I would do my main lift at that point in time. And then at the very end of the night, so anywhere between 7:30 and 9 p.m., I would do another 45, maybe an hour long of get my accessory work in. And so I was doing this every single day. So it's literally like wore me out to the point of like, hey, I hit September, I'm 2 months out from nationals, and I got completely fried, like completely done. I'm like, and I couldn't do it. And so I didn't even end up going to nationals, which is unfortunate. Um, because at that point, I had a pulse bench of 430. So I'm like, I know with the adrenaline, like I can get more people. I might be able to pump out another 5 pounds by that time. But I was just completely spent. Like it got to the point where I would just walk in and be like, nah, I got zero motivation to lift a weight today. And that stretch for some reason hit me so hard. Like I didn't recover from that until 3 years down the line. So like my training for about 3 years was so sporadic. It was maybe once a week to maybe not even training that week from the age of 25 to 28. And again, like that was also a huge point in my life. I bought my first house, I got married, and had my wife and I had two kids already by that point. So in that time, so a lot of things personally kind of happened too that added to my stress levels. But from a training standpoint, it really just burnt me out big time. Um, but then once I recovered from it, I started doing just on my own, still doing like some one RM lifts, but I wouldn't do it in the same like traditional West Side format where you would do like an upper and a lower in the same week. I kind of like created a little bit of a system that I called like biweekly, like West Side basically. So one week you would do a lower body max effort and then do a strength block for the, say, call it the upper body. You still do your two dynamics. And then the next week you would flip flop the order of everything. So then you would do a max effort for the upper, a strength day for the lower, and you would still then do your two dynamics. And that was much more sustainable for me versus following like these constant, like two max sets every single week. And I did that for quite a while. That was probably like 3 years of my training that I was doing that. And I was taking some personal clients through that as well, and they were all loving it. Like seeing like just huge growth inside their strength numbers. Um, and then during that time frame, I was also getting heavily into like just playing golf on my own as a hobby. And then I finally got TPI certified. I'm a level 2 fitness, level 2 power. And what I notice in my own game of playing golf is that like when I lift super heavy, and even if I'm still doing my mobility work, my golf swing is completely changed. Right. Like it's weird, which it shouldn't, because like my mobility is still there. My range of motion is still there. But like when I lift super heavy, my golf swing feels completely out of whack. But like when I just lift moderately, it's like it feels so smooth and effortlessly. So so nowadays, like that's kind of like where my training is for me personally. I just try to maintain my like 80 to 85% of my max weight, and that's all I really will go up to nowadays. I try to keep it relatively light and easy. I do more zone 2, zone 3 cardio work now than I've ever have done before. Uh, and that has translated better for me on the golf course than when I was doing like my super heavy lifting. So,
No, that's awesome. I haven't worked with golf too often, so it's interesting to hear those things as well too, because
yeah.
it makes sense that like developing, like building a lot of like maximal strength at that time period, like your body is going to recruit a lot more muscles, and you're going to think that you're
Mm-hmm.
actually putting more effort behind your swing, and it's going to mess up some of those very fine motor skills
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit
Yeah.
because it's so technical. The
Yeah.
same with Olympic lifting, it feels like too, even though it's probably an easy or replicable movement because it
Mm-hmm.
just translates from the bar to the bar versus like the bar to a golf club. But
Yeah.
it's very interesting. Like I've dealt with the same thing, like that burnout feeling where you're burning the candle at both ends. Like to train at
Mm-hmm.
4:30 a.m. and then do your accessory work
Yeah.
like before and after coaching
Yeah.
is is
Yeah.
ridiculous. I
Yeah. I don't, I still to this day, I'm like, the things that we did, like in our youth, and I'll call my 20s like still my youth. I'm only 34, so like we're still very young. But like, I could stay up till 2 a.m. and then still get up and be in on time for my 5 a.m. clients and have all the energy in the world and not be affected by it. But if I try to do that now at 34, like there's no way. Like I'll have a whole pot of coffee drank before 6 a.m. and I'll still be like, man, when am I going to find a midday nap? Like it's just different. It's crazy. So
Yeah, it's almost like that old adage where like you tell college athletes are like you can be good at academics, athletics, and social life, but you can only pick two. Like when you're a coach who's trying to compete and you have like a personal life and a family or like other obligations that are
yeah,
more important than just sleeping in your office, like stuff outside of that, it's
yeah,
really hard to manage all three and excel at all three. Like one of them is going to suffer.
correct.
And like for you, like that's where the competing side comes, like kind of took a step back. And
Yep.
that's the same on my end. Like unfortunately, like that's just where it falls, and it doesn't make any money, so it's probably the
Yeah.
best one to let
Exactly.
fall.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm thankful too. Like, my two oldest daughters that are 6 and 5, like whenever they have the opportunity to work out with either myself or my wife, like they love to do so. So like if they're with us, like they're not a hindrance if we need to get a training session in. But at the same time, it's not ever going to be as effective because they're constantly asking, like, "Hey, get me up on the pull-up bar so I can do some pull-ups," and it's which is fun, and it's like those are the experiences that you cherish. But yeah, like you said, something's gonna go down a little bit, and so for my training, it's much more efficient now. Like I really only have a max of 60 minutes to truly dedicate to it, and honestly, like my ideal time is to try to get in and out in 45 minutes. So try to be way more efficient with it. I try to limit my rest intervals as low as I possibly can. So like even on my strength days, like if I can take a max of only 2 minutes in between my sets, like that's ideal. If I feel recovered within 1 minute, like I'm going right away within 1 minute. So
No, that's great
that's,
advice for anybody that's kind of stuck in a pinch or has a lot
mhm.
of other obligations going. Like I know the days of me training like with Andy in like Powers weight room for 4 hours, like
Yeah, exactly.
doing nonsense. Like even
Hmm.
some of the strongman days, like if I've got something going on Saturday, I was like, I either got to start at 4 a.m. or I have to cap this. Like I got to be very
Yeah.
efficient. But it's cool that like you, after all that stuff and you got burnout, you found something that was sustainable and it was
Hmm.
manageable, but you could do it for a long period of time versus try to like just grind so hard
Yeah.
and wear yourself thin. Like I think a lot of people lose sight of some of the best lifters in the country do the basics very well, and their goal is
Hmm.
just to put 5 pounds on it. It's because they pick a
Yeah.
program, they listen to their bodies, they pick a program that's smart and it's sustainable for the long term versus, hey, can I do small of and squat 10 times this week as much as possible? Yeah, you could do that for a little bit, but you can't do
Hmm.
that forever.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's exactly what we try to like tell our high school athletes, because obviously like when we have our guys in here, all they care about is how much stronger their bench has gotten, their squat has gotten. And in say a 3 month block, like we may only put on 20 or 25 pounds to that max, and then they're like, oh, I didn't like get that much. Like that's not that much heavier. I'm like, but like, let's go back to where you were 1 year ago, and we'll pull up their maxes from 1 year ago. It's like over the whole period of time, you just went up anywhere between 75 to 100 pounds. I'm like, that's huge when we look at it from a yearly standpoint. Like, and that's sustainable growth. Like, that's what we want to see, just slowly piling on from year to year. And it's trying our best to like educate them on that. Like we don't want to see this huge growth within one block and then you make no to very little growth the rest of that time period. So,
Exactly.
like you're saying, sustainability, right? Like you got to be able to just stretch it out for the long run.
Exactly. Hey, so I know we got to get you out of here soon. So, like any good training session, we end the show with the finisher. So, I got 4 quarters, 4 questions,
Okay.
and maybe overtime at the end. So, you can go rapid fire or you could take your time on each, but you ready?
Okay. Yeah.
All right, first one I got for you, which I probably know. Biggest influence in strength and conditioning and favorite athlete growing up.
So, favorite athlete growing up is going to have to be Jerry Rice. Was he? Yeah. Like he's pretty much the reason why I got into playing football. I loved watching him growing up. And I've never been like a strict teams uh, fan. I've always been a player fan. So like technically, if I'm going to cheer for a team, I'll cheer for a Philly team because I grew up in a Philly household. But like I'm always looking for that great player that's it's usually like a wide receiver or a running back that I like just love to follow, and I just kind of like cheer them on regardless of who they're playing. And then uh mentor without that was the one question. So currently I would say I follow a lot of work on Corey Sledginger right now, and I've had some good conversations with him because I love his idea of microdosing and doing, small amount of work, about 20 to 30 minutes every day, and building on top of each other every single day. So if you miss one day, it's not that big of a deal. You can just pick up with the next day and just keep moving forward. So it's not like you're missing a 60-minute training window at that point.
Definitely. Hey, so when you're not coaching and training, what are some of your hobbies outside of the weight room walls?
So we kind of talked about one golf, but it's also maintaining my landscaping at my house. So I do a lot of mulching rock beds. Love getting on the tractor, trying to design some new straight line in my grass. So doing that, and plus my daughters love going out and for some whatever reason they enjoy picking weeds with us. So that's always enjoyable.
Hey, that's a good habit to teach them.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, if you weren't coaching, what do you think you would be doing as a career right now?
So I kind of touched on it a little bit. I would definitely be somewhere in the medical field. I still remember when I was in third grade, we had to write a time capsule to ourselves that we would get when we graduated high school. And in it, it said, by this time, you will be going to college to pursuing a degree in to become a doctor. So I probably, and I came very close. Like I almost switched my major to pre-med. So I feel like I probably would be down that route.
Okay. Hey, so if you're setting up an ideal training day, and this could be whether the kids are trying to jump up on the pull-up bar, or if you actually get one training session by yourself, what is your go-to training music and your best post-training meal look like?
Ooh, so I am very much a emotional music listener. So depending on my mood for the day dictates my music. So like if I'm just like pretty chill and I'm flowing, I'm probably gonna ironically enough, like I'll play some reggae. But if I'm like just really irritated and I need to have an angry lift, like I'm gonna put some System of a Down, Slipknot, like something like that's gonna be popping off. But some of my best training days have been with my reggae music. So I'll say reggae music. And then post workout meal for me is probably just going to be the lunch that my wife probably made me for that week. So this week's been a straight up banger. She made us this like chili lime chicken with fresh diced up tomatoes, fresh mozzarella, a little bit of Parmesan cheese, and garlic green beans. And that's been unreal. So that's been like my post workout meal this week, and that's been spot on.
Not too bad. Hey,
Yeah.
so last one I got for you for overtime. What's the most valuable piece of advice you've received?
Honestly, I would say it was just a quote that was given to us when I was in high school by our high school football coach, and it's the quote is, "If you want something you never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done." And I try my absolute best to just keep taking that mantra and applying it every single day. I want my personal online business, M.O.A.B, to grow and to continue to expand. So that's me being, more open to doing social videoing and posting that stuff, which I truly like. That's like the hardest thing for me to do, is to have to like post a video about myself or to talk. I'm not a very social person. And I like to kind of keep to myself. So me like putting all that out there, that's hard for me. So that's me doing something I don't think I would have ever done to help push that business to where I want it to go.
Well, hey, you did it today with this. So I really appreciate you coming on. And for all those that have questions, or like you just said for M.O.A.B, where can people find you? Where can people get in touch and kind of see what's going on with all that too?
Yeah, so I'm usually just on Instagram. I just use my personal page primarily, which is Coach B, and then Swoleson, Swoleson, and then I'm pretty much just posting on that full time.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we'll link everything together. Like I said, I know you got to run out of here pretty soon, but I appreciate you coming on today, Coach. It was good to kind of connect again and see what you got going on. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Likewise. Thank you. This was fun.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.